Get the agenda out. I'll open the regular meeting of the Design Review Subcommittee for the City of San Clemente, Wednesday, June 29th, 2020 meeting. We have one set of minutes, it looks like, to approve. Any changes or motion?
Well, I wasn't here, but I did review it, and
Yeah, Scott was here.
How do we do that?
I mean, I reviewed it, and I think it looks good.
But he wasn't here, so we'd know what went on. Should we just carry those over till the next meeting?
Yeah, let's do that. I think that's tomorrow.
We'll carry the minutes over to the next meeting until we have two people that attended that meeting.
Yeah.
Have any of the applicants been through this process for the City of San Clemente before?
Oh, no.
No. I'm going to read just a quick blurb on what we do and what we're here for. The purpose of the subcommittee is to provide direction, insight, concerns, and options to the applicant on how the project can best comply with the city's design guidelines and or city policies. The subcommittee is not a reviewing body. They make recommendations to the Planning Commission, zoning administrator regarding a project's compliance with the city design guidelines. Each of the subcommittee members will provide input and suggest recommendations to the applicant based upon written city guidelines and or policies. The subcommittee will not design the project for the applicant, nor will the members always agree on the best course of action. The applicant can then assess the input and incorporate any changes accordingly, with the understanding that the subcommittee is simply a recommending body. Decisions to approve, deny, or modify a project are made by the Planning Commission, City Council, and or zoning administrator with input and recommendations from the subcommittee and city staff. And the subcommittee is made up of planning commissioners. And we are both planning commissioners, and just as luck would have it, we're both also architects. So hopefully we understand what we're looking at.
How long have you been on Barton? 8 years?
I'm thinking in my 11th year, going on 12.
You got serious problems.
See, I haven't had treatment.
Yeah, you got to get treatment. That's right here.
Okay, so our architecture review of the following items. Item A, Master Project 21322, Cavada Mixed Use Project 1430 South El Camino Real. Jonathan Lightfoot is the staff member presenting it. Jonathan?
Okay, great, thank you. Thanks applicant team for being here today. I think we'll have a good, productive review. So I have a PowerPoint that goes through the different recommendations that were listed in the report, so we have a visual that we can look at the same time as that recommendation. So I'm just going to direct our attention up there. Starting high level though, with just a quick description of the project. It's a 10 apartment unit project, but mixed use with commercial on the ground floor and parking that's available by alley and from the side, so side loaded and alley loaded parking that's not visible from El Camino Real. Design review is required for this project. In the end, will require 3 different entitlements: site plan permit, cultural heritage permit, and discretionary sign permit. So this review today really is going to focus on those first 2, the site plan and the cultural heritage permit elements. The design is something we'll need to come back for, but it didn't quite make sense to have that discussion yet until we finalize or get to a point where we're comfortable with the final layout and design of the building. The site that we're looking at is just under a ½ acre at South El Camino Real in Valencia. This has been a focus area for the city. We have a couple of other projects that were approved recently here, so the city is excited that we are having some redevelopment in this area. It's within the mixed-use 3.2 zone in our architectural, affordable housing, and coastal zone overlays. This is an aerial view of that site. It's 2 parcels currently. Those will be merged into one for this project. Starting here, this is a perspective that you'd see from that El Camino Real off-ramp of the building. And commercial, again, is that ground floor with residential uses above. The exception being, as currently proposed, that center area under the dome would be an office space accessible by an elevator. I brought in a couple of images. There have been a couple of mixed-use projects approved recently in San Clemente, so I thought that would just be valuable for us to take a look at a couple that have been approved in the past 10 years or so and built. So this one is in the North Beach area off North El Camino, and then not far from your project site is another one, the 1010 Santiago project on South El Camino. So the recommendations, number one is to focus on the gateway perspective. This is the under construction but is now complete project that is a senior living facility at Calafia, so it's the next exit south. So a similar context where you come off the freeway, come to a stop, face like perpendicular to El Camino Real, and while you're at that stop, you will have a great view of this project and then also of your project. And so it is something that we just want to emphasize, that this is archetypal of a gateway where this is going to be the first impression that many people have of the city as they come off of that exit. And so I've referenced a few general plan guidelines that highlight the importance of Spanish colonial designs of that location. So at ground floor patio or loggia areas, the general plan doesn't require ground floor usable space in this area. On Del Mar it would. You would have to have ground floor access. However, it is still something that makes these areas engaging. We are still in the pedestrian overlay zone, and so this image to the right is in Santa Barbara. It's an example of a very simple way of providing some space on site that has a little more pedestrian interest as opposed to just the building wall. There's a lot of ways that could be done, but that's a quick visual of that recommendation. Treat the different portions of the building as independent segments, and we can come back into this a little bit later. I'm going to stand up to highlight a couple of things that I'm thinking here. So first glance, we do have element A, B, C. But within that, there's a couple things I think that we could improve. So one of those would be a couple of notches that don't seem to visually make sense. We have this carve out here, for instance, where if we're viewing this as a standalone element, that seems a little bit out of place and is replicated over there. We also have roofing elements that don't necessarily follow the breakdown of those distinct ABC pieces. So thinking of like how can we align that in a way that again complements almost those three sections as independent, thinking of them as standalone elements. So that's the gist of that comment number 3. Comment number 4 is to limit repeated patterns that create a mirrored design. We're always going to have some balance, but thinking of some ways to break it up so that if you were to fold the project in half, it's not exactly the same. So thinking of ways to offset. A lot of times Spanish colonial will have some imbalance to it, and so plugging that in a way that is not as mirrored as is currently shown. You do have, I'll point out, like we do have an example of that difference there, but I think we want to accentuate that a little bit more than is currently shown. The rear elevation just has a lot going on, so I think that there's some ways we can simplify that. What I have here are a few different X's to show, to bring attention to those. So I think we'd want to limit like plant-on elements, and we have a few of those here. And we have, for instance, a couple areas where there's something that just needs to be designed more for the use. So I like that thought of having some kind of this shed roof over the entry, but the extension beyond that just doesn't seem to fit the use. So any of the design elements that we're bringing in, like coming back to thinking like what's the purpose of it, making sure it has a purpose. These are common elements, these pop-outs, but again, with so much going on, that might be a way to even just completely remove those and get a better fluid stucco consistency on the rear. So that's where a few of those designs are coming from. Again, the arches are common, obviously, in our Spanish colonial Bible, but that repeated pattern, when we have so many other things, that might be another area where we limit that opening to bring in more stucco in that location, and reduce just the amount of things that are going on that elevation. And I think we'll come back to all these images, so you can respond and we can get feedback from our committee. Number 6, highlight the primary entry. So this is another example, I think also from Santa Barbara. Within our Henry Lenny design guidelines, this is a key element that's referenced. So really bringing attention to the primary entry, setting that in. And on our elevation, to go back to it, at this, if this remains the primary entry, bringing some additional quality materials or elements to that, whether that's a tile surround or a metal awning above, something of that sort that just kind of very quickly re-emphasizes that that's the primary entry point. Consider opening the courtyard to the sky. So consider opening this central courtyard area up so that internal area just feels more open air. Again, these are all recommendations or guidelines or thoughts. None of these, or at least this one in particular, is something that's more of a point of discussion than we need to have this. Consider removing the office balconies and enclosing that space. That comes back to maximizing your floor area ratio. We do have some of these balconies on Del Mar, and I'd be interested in the committee's feedback on that, where I don't see the greatest use coming from those, and so that might be another way to simplify that elevation. And the other piece of that is if we shift that as usable space forward, it's not a lot, but if we're able to shift some space forward that way, the thinking was maybe, Hannibal, there's an opportunity to shift some other things that get us to a point of being able to comply with the transitional alley height limit. We'll get to that too, though. So yeah, the next slide here, improve compliance with transitional height limit. So staff did send their development review letter this week as well. This is one area that's not currently meeting the code standard. However, their resubmittal indicated that one of the 10 units will be affordable, and this is a scenario that isn't as common for Planning Commission. When they have a low affordable unit, provided they get an incentive or concession, which means they can identify a code standard that essentially they're unable to, or not even unable to, but they don't have to comply with a code standard. And this is a state regulatory framework.
A code or an ordinance standard?
A code standard.
Zoning code?
Correct, yeah. So it could be applied for setbacks, it could be applied for a number of things. And so as currently listed, this is the area that we're not currently complying with in the development plan set. And you can see it's not from like a roof element, but the way that our code is framed in this mixed use 3.2 is it considers anything as like a top of roof. So there shouldn't be anything above this 28 foot height limit within 13 feet of the alley line. Forgive the slight quarter-inch issues. That was just me measuring quick in my program. But within 13 feet of that back alley, this is the upper limit. So they have a guardrail for that deck that it intrudes into that transitional area, but with that affordable unit, they would be able to get an exemption from that standard.
And what's the approval process for that?
There's not a separate approval process for that, so it's under the state's density bonus law, so that segment of state code would be referenced in the approvals. There's no separate environmental review. Actually, we're prohibited from evaluating that separately. So that would be covered in that way. And then I have some additional imagery for consideration later, but I would like to go back and either go through these one at a time, or give the committee an opportunity to just look at the plans and raise other things that they'd like to discuss.
Why don't you go through it, and then we'll have the applicant, if they'd like to make a presentation and respond to your suggestions, then we can open it up for discussion.
Sure, okay. So Hannibal, if you want to comment on these, we'll go one at a time and give your feedback.
Yeah, I rather have you finish everything and then I go one by one.
Okay, yeah, so I'm finished with my portion, so we'll go one by one
Okay.
with you now. So tell me, we'll transition the slides as we go, but if you want to respond to each of these
Well,
recommendations.
let's start with the front facade.
Okay.
And by the way, I have two different angles also from which it was not presented to you. This is from the south. This is going this way, it's the opposite of that. And also this one coming from the
South
left.
heading north,
Yeah,
okay.
this is from the alley. Like this, you have it over there, right? Well, as far as getting this mirror image, yeah, that's very much possible, to modify it. As far as the roof goes, for the roof line, in the back, if you see it, on the side, we're having a flat roof with a parapet and the molding. These are all precast molding. On the opposite side, you have a pitched roof. So again, not to have a mirror image, that can be achieved also to go with a different type of roofing or different type of roof elements. That's very much possible to do it. As for those dents, the recessed inside, those are structural. That we had to do it in order to achieve, the second level or the third level from back for the floor area. I just thought, if I have it flat going up, and then it would be very much like a box, So this, we can eliminate one side, and then the other side, leave it over there. But then I can work on it and see, how it's going to look like. As far as the entrance, yeah, that can have some awnings in there and then some tile works. If you look at this rendering, maybe it shows better, than what is the elevations over there and the colors. So those recommendations are very much, possible to do. So we can work on that.
So when you were talking about the fence, you're talking about the quadrifoils up there on the
Yeah,
gable ends?
right.
So you were actually,
Those quadrifoil, yeah, well, I saw it in the back, he crossed it, that he doesn't want to have those. That's okay. Can remove.
Doesn't he want it in the back, or he doesn't?
Well, you show it in the back, but then in the front, I didn't see the elevations on the front, that you crossed it.
Yeah, I didn't cross it off on the front. I think on the rear we don't have. Here's my thinking. Again, we have three separate segments, and each segment could have certain pieces that highlight it. So the quadrifoil on this elevation didn't bother me, whereas on the rear elevation we didn't have like central elements of design or focus, and so it seemed like these like quadrifoil type elements were, let's glue one here and glue one there to try to make it Spanish. Does that make sense? So the balance of it didn't affect me as much here. I don't know if the committee has a thought. So I'm not opposed to them on this elevation.
Well, in order to have it over there, the roof line that I have, the pitched roof, if we eliminate the pitched roof, then there is no reason of having them in there. At least on one of the elements. Let's say call it number 3. But then on some of the pictures that you showed, they are sitting back, from the property line, from sidewalks. So that's why they have room to do things. Here we're almost right on the property line, within 3-4 feet, some of it, to have a landscape in front of that. So sitting back and forth for the building or the structure of it, we took advantage of maximum area that we could do.
So
But
let's-
as far as the mirror image,
Mhm.
that is very doable. Yeah.
And I hear your concern about, like the straight edge, dropping this right down. That personally doesn't bother me. I'll let the committee respond to that. And in some ways, that gains you some extra ground area down below and may help with this replication concern that I have, where we have 3 windows, 3 windows, 3 windows, 3 windows, right? If you drop this edge all the way down, then this becomes a cohesive element, and you lose, like that element there, and maybe you do something different with your glazing in that spot. Does that make sense? So that's kind of one way that I could see that
Right.
just being a simple transition. Committee, would you like to respond to the front elevation now, or do you want Hannibal to work through the
Let's
other?
go around the whole building and then we'll.
Okay, so I'm gonna go back to comment 1 here real quick, Hannibal. So this one, I don't need a response necessarily today, but just something for you to think about is from this perspective. So you see here at the other one that I referenced, you have a couple tower elements that really catch your eye as you're at this gateway off ramp, and so just thinking through that, or whether a public art piece, something like that at that intersection could be used. But you don't need to respond to this one today. So this one, though, I think would be a good comment piece for us to look at. I'm going to go back to the elevation, but adding some kind of outdoor ground accessible space, is that something that you can incorporate? And a benefit of that, as well as our parking, sorry, I'm trying to be able to look at all of you. Our code allows for businesses to have some outdoor seats that don't require parking if they're outdoors, because our general plan wants to encourage that. Again, it makes it more interesting on the street. So is that something that you would be able or interested in?
Absolutely, we're interested.
Modify.
But then again, if you look at it, we have in some areas we have only 3 feet, 2.5 feet, which if we put the seating over there, we have to have some kind of easement or approval, from the city going on a public right of way. So if that's not the case, then yes, absolutely, having seating, outside.
So an alternative. Right now, these are bumped out, but not all the way to the property line. It could be even looking at, we talked about the loggia idea before, right? Where you have maybe this is a scenario where you pull this even a couple feet more forward towards the property line, but instead of this being a door, it's more of an open arch, and you have kind of an covered, so you have a roof, but an outdoor space that's transitional before you go indoors. Is that something that?
Yeah, if you
could be
bring the
possible?
floor plan, maybe on the street level, plan, then I can tell you, show you how that works. How much we have. We have landscape in order to make that UOA, in here. This landscape area is the area that seating will go. So if I eliminate this, go with the pavers as we have in front of each entrance, then I would not have landscaping there.
Well, I think what he's referring to is in our code, for any restaurant, I think it's over 32
Yes.
seats.
Correct.
By right, you could have 16 outdoor seats
Right.
without providing parking at all. So if you reduced how many seats does each of your restaurants have?
Well, we're going for 16 seats without going for the parking, I believe. It is 16 seats, going for each restaurant up to, if you go 4, what he recommended it on here, 4 plus 16, so we can go about 20 seats. Well, 16 for outdoor, and then the indoor. Those are such a small ones. I don't know. We are proposing about 4 to 6 seats inside.
So, Commissioner, if you look at the title sheet, one of my comments, and not in the design review, but in the staff letter, you'll see that at the bottom of the column where there's parking on the title sheet, there's a total provided of 48, total required of 42. So they have a surplus of 6. So I had recommended that they add that into their restaurant count as well. So they have 6 that are unaccounted. So that would allow them to bump that up. And rewinding a little bit further, some context. It was initially submitted as retail, but we had a grease trap because they don't have a tenant yet. So we said it makes a lot more sense for us to be able to consider this as a restaurant, and that's the higher parking demand, so that this isn't something that has to go back for reconsideration in the future. So they may have a retail on one side and a restaurant on the other side, or something of that sort. With that surplus there, they would be able to at least get one of those spaces up to a spot where there would be. They'd be above the 32 seat count and would be able to have.
Well, but also for under 32, they could get 8.
Correct.
So each one of these restaurants is, you're figuring 12 seats inside? Is that it?
You said even less.
I'm looking on the cover sheet under parking.
Yeah, they
Commercial.
currently are showing 40 seats allocated total.
Between the 3 restaurants. So that's about 13 seats inside per restaurant. It's strictly a business decision on your guys' choice whether you want to take advantage of that. If
We would
Of
like
those-
to have it for outdoor. Oh, yeah,
You're
yeah.
gonna be able to do that.
Outdoor. So outdoor, again, if you look at the plan, what I have in there is landscape on either side of the entrance of each unit.
yes,
So that is the
about 3 feet or
yeah,
something.
that is the area that you can have a seating in there. So if I take that away, then we're short of landscape requirements. Oh sheet A1, I believe.
And let's see, retail. 1 per 300, 1 per 4 seats. We're not saying we can give you any outdoor seating. It would be that you'd have to create outdoor seating by reducing something else or creating a patio. So, like I said, that's a business decision on your part. If you can, if each of those restaurants, say, had 8 seats inside, and
4 seats outside for each.
and you could have on the outside, then you could have 8 seats free, so you'd only be providing parking for 8 seats inside, say.
And my understanding that
But that would mean you'd be shrinking your restaurant footage, which is you're gonna have to balance your rent on inside-outside dining.
yeah, shrinking
Because
that
you lose a little
and
square footage, but you're picking it up in outside
outdoor
space.
seating.
And some places have done it that Jonathan had mentioned down at Beach Fire. Down in Del Mar.
Brussels.
Brussels has it where
Brussels Bistro.
the exterior wall is actually maybe 8 feet in from the
Inside, yeah.
face of the building. And you have outside seating. And it's a great thing, but it's not a mandatory that we can require by going Spanish colonial. But it does encourage the pedestrian usage of the area. And restaurants with it seem to do better than restaurants without it.
And my thinking too, and so I now have the site plan here showing. So we have these areas that are kind of entry, where we have the tile anyways, and so that isn't specifically landscaping. If you open that up and make a portion of that counts towards your urban open area, right? Because it's not like a sealed interior space.
Right.
So that actually increases your compliance with that standard.
Right. See, if I don't do the symmetrical, then it's okay. Those double doors, it can be a single door. They don't have to be on a center. then I can use that outdoor seating, And also if I can just bring it inside by 3 feet, maybe that increases, I can get seating area for maybe 6-7 feet, from property line.
Yeah, and my one quick recommendation on that would be get a sense of table sizes so that you can, like a common 4-top, right? Just make sure that you'd be able to accommodate that 4-top type
Right.
table in that space, ADA turnarounds, those basic elements.
Okay.
Okay, so that was that comment. Let's jump back to the PowerPoint. 1, 2, 3, 4. So let's go to, we addressed this in the overall front elevation discussion. So now let's move to the rear elevation. So Hannibal, if you can give us a response on the rear elevation.
You can do that.
Right. Again, in here, I can get rid of those quadrifoil, so we don't need to have them if you think it's too busy. I don't think so it is. However, on the side wall where you have a very flat wall going up, so I have some
Big wall.
architectural ornamental, decor, in there. So that's what you have X on it. As for those arches that they're opening, you say to close it, those are in a purpose open because it is the parking structure. And that's why in that area over there, we're not having any ventilation. So our ventilation would be the open, spaces in the wall.
I think he's talking about the shape of the opening, not
Well,
the fact that there is.
I think he's asking that there's too many.
Closest, it says close those.
Or,
Is
or,
that
yeah,
what you said?
Or reduce the number and or size of those openings.
Maybe change the center one to a different look.
No, different look. Yeah, I can make a different look, So rather than going with arch, and some of them, go with the flat at the top.
So I have one quick example just for design reviews reference. So here's a garage that just has like narrower openings for that ventilation. So that was a bit of where the comment was coming from. Is like, is there a way to, because while the arches are good elements, I think there's just too many openings in the stucco on that rear elevation. So maybe something of that sort could be considered to reduce how many openings there are.
I think there's going to need to be, a discussion about the overall, massing and scale and balance of the architecture. So we were kind of getting into some detail areas and what you could do with this opening, that opening. But I think there should be a discussion about the overall appearance.
And it's easier to do that before you even get into the detail.
Yeah, I think we could get bogged down here. Where, I think we need to give them an opportunity to come back with something that's greatly simplified and talks a little bit more about this architecture as opposed to ornament or style, those kinds of discussions. And I think, I'd like to, address that a little bit. But
You've had the
we can wait
opportunity
till we
to review the,
through.
Yes, sure.
I think it's kind of a bigger picture concern that I had.
I
don't know
see
about
that.
you, Bart, but-
And I see that picture over there that you have at the back, to stay away from it.
that's a to be avoided
Right.
page.
Yeah, he has that page over there.
But not to do that.
If the subcommittee would like, we're going through staff's comments with accurate responses, but if we're open to having a more structured discussion from bigger concept to
Yeah,
smaller.
right now, we're going through around the building with their comments and the
Which
applicants'
I think we like the comments.
understanding of
Yeah,
them.
I'm just
And then
saying,
we're gonna jump in and either say agree, or
I'm
come
just,
up with our approach.
I'm just throwing out the idea that if
Yeah, we want to be efficient.
Commissioner Camp would suggest that staff would always be open to providing kind of the global perspective from the subcommittee to the applicant, just so it's clear
This
what
is an informal format.
Yeah, we're here to work with you to try to
We
come up with
appreciate
the
that.
best design. Work with you to try to
We
come up with
appreciate
the
that.
best design.
But as far as the back facade elevations, what you have pictured over there, this is the first thing I saw, and I tried to stay away from it, and I did as much as possible, from not to have exactly like that. And this is not exactly like this, so that's why you see those elements, sitting back and forth, and then some different materials, and the gray railings, and also the quadrifoil that you have over there, or the openings, inside of. And also I have some clay pipes, that is coming. This is very much Spanish colonial. But then in achieving those unit of apartments that we have in the back, with the open space, each of them, they have a balcony. So they have a big balconies. Each of these units, they have bigger balconies than any other units, that I see. I drove throughout the city, and their private balconies are very small, minimum with what code, or city requirements are. So here we're getting much bigger. So I thought they can use this outdoor spaces, as much as possible. In some of them we have about 8 feet of a balcony, open balcony for them in the width. So.
Tim, you went through this, through Nick's project, went through the project, and the transition zone across a alley was a very hotly discussed topic of making a easy transition to the residential on the other side. And I'm just curious that giving up the ordinance that was meant to protect that field, that transition zone, is what they're requesting. Do we have a choice in that, or not? I mean, you're saying the state mandate, or no, the state says they don't have to comply with all, but is anything sacred that they can't change? Or can we make something that they can't change? Like the transition protection at the alley.
So is that negotiable, I guess, is the question, right?
I mean, I think that it's certainly within the purview to say we would strongly prefer that you deviate from this standard as opposed to that standard.
Okay.
And we think you can make the project fit by doing that, by deviating from this one. But no, there's nothing that's sacred. So it is, like once affordable housing is in play and they have that incentive concession option on the table, we wouldn't be able to draw a hard line.
Yeah, but it does have to, meet the requirements from a design and aesthetic standpoint.
Certainly.
So that's an area that we can consider.
Because right now, I think there's only about 2 buildings that are on the other side. Who knows what it's going to be in the future? They can go up, they can be denser, particularly with what the state of California is requiring, and that's going to become not so much a transition area anymore. It's just going to be boom, boom. So if there's another one we can recommend, raise your hand when we get to it.
Okay.
Well, I will say the one thing that I did notice between Nick's project and this project is this is an outdoor space. The massing, the challenge with Nick's project is he had, like it was walls and massing.
That's how he started,
That's
absolutely.
right, yeah, and exactly, that's how he started. I think what the ask here is the allowance of the balcony fence. That's the exception, if I'm not mistaken, that we're asking for here is the ability to build that fence, that 4-foot high fence
Blowing
line.
the guardrail.
And is that on the third, is that only on the third level that's encroaching?
That's the exception, if I'm not mistaken. The exception is the ability to build that little piece of fence. And so the massing in itself, in terms of like domination or presence over the community, isn't quite like a big wall or the building being built over. It's the ability to isn't that right, Jonathan?
It's the extension of the balcony.
Correct.
It's basically making a balcony, right? You couldn't build it without that little fence extension. And so
It's a guardrail.
it's a
That's
guardrail, yeah. And
It doesn't
so
have to be a fence.
the code kind of eliminates the guardrail because of the way that massing component is meant to keep it from, like presenting itself to the neighborhood. But I think with that is you're saying, well, it's, you could make it almost see-through. So, like it glass, you could make it almost something where it doesn't
Yeah, and I think we understand, you're trying to get more balcony space by encroaching in that area up above,
I think
above the 28 foot.
I think without it, I don't think we could have a balcony space.
Well, you have 8 feet there.
It's not just the balcony, it's also, you're looking up underneath the balcony extension. So it kind of,
And or there's a,
Yeah.
well, the roof element is lower, right? That
we
little,
have a graphic on there somewhere
on the back elevation.
that Jonathan put in here.
So that roof up there, that also extends out to the same
I think that's
same
within
distance.
Isn't that within the code though? That tertiary component of the third floor is like within the allowances. I thought it was just that balcony guard.
It looks like the building wall is okay.
Yeah,
So that roof you're saying is underneath the 28 feet?
yeah. It's
Yeah.
Good.
It's close, so that the section doesn't go through that portion.
Yeah.
The section cuts through right here.
Yeah,
So we can see that this portion of the guardrail is above. This portion of the shed roof right here may also be above. These elements, to be clear, are within the allowed footprint or the allowed box of development. So
really-
this.
But the balcony's floor area is also encroaching, not just that height limit. I just want to make sure we don't get to the commission level and see how the floor area of that balcony actually
I see what you're saying.
encroaches.
So that encroachment there, it really
So you're
is.
looking up,
Yeah,
so that would have to be addressed to convince everybody that it's not encroaching on the transition area that,
Yeah, you see
I
the
mean, you
other
guys
side of the roof.
spend a lot of time protecting that.
yeah. I think it'll be interesting to see what type of visual and impact it will have, and just feeling. Right? A lot of the time it's just a feeling. Right? Like, neighbors look at me like, oh, is this thing just sitting over me? I anticipate that just because it's going to be a transparent fence line, it may not have that same feel as a straight wall, right, that's been pushed out as far. And it also creates a little bit more of a social component, right? With a balcony, it has that feel of almost blending a little bit more. Instead of just being a commercial building or just something that runs right there, it has a feel where it's like neighbor to neighbor. I hate to say it, just a little different from other things that have been attempted in that area. Candidly, we always kind of wanted those paseos to be a little activated.
Yeah.
We've always wanted it to be a little bit more of a walkable space. We just haven't really ever quite found the alchemy. So not that it is an exception. But I would say in terms of like what the intent of the paseo item is and the approximation of things like that without the balcony fence there, you just couldn't really do the balcony. It wouldn't be quote unquote balcony. It would be like a 4 foot. If I'm not
The
wrong.
floor is within the 28 feet.
Yeah.
No, I totally understand that. I just,
Only the rating, guardrail, is.
we
Yeah,
have,
the other side of that argument is that when you have those open guardrails, you can sort of just see right in. People put their Webers and their beach towels and you pretty much can look right in.
Kind of look like the rest of Southwest at that point, right?
Yeah, you see this one, you see how many, can you go back to that, please?
So I just grabbed this is the Allied perspective of that 1010 Santiago project. So this is what was built.
How tall is that? Now that would be, if you look at that, you're like, I'm looking at a garage, right? It's
well,
not,
that's the lower level.
yeah.
Then it
So-
steps back.
But here's
How
part of
far
the
it
issue
goes
here.
back?
That is a garage, and when you look at it, you see one particular portion of a building.
Yeah.
From this perspective, that's a one-story building.
Yeah.
And the weight of Spanish colonial revival architecture is easily supported by the amount of openings that they have. When you've got a second floor on top and then you've got a bunch of openings, it's like Spanish colonial is meant to look like Adobe
But this is a
with heavy
two-story.
timber, right?
This is a two-story.
I know this was my project years ago.
Oh,
Yeah,
I see.
yeah.
Very familiar, but
Yeah.
this particular section, it doesn't look. It's not unclear why this roof is held up. I mean, granted, with current technology, you can make anything, twigs hold up, heavy things. But it's mildly buttressed. You've got it's a thick wall. When you have a second story on top, like you're proposing, and then you have as many openings, you start to lose the structure, like the visual
solid
structure,
solidity.
solidity. Yes, that's what I'm going with. And it's just a mild, compromise.
It's a subtlety in the Spanish colonial revival guidelines that
And I will
addresses
say,
that.
I will say, as far as the balcony, I believe that there were some architectural projections that were able to encroach into that third story cutaway, and they were the walls between the patios. So to provide privacy between those patios, I believe that those sections were able to encroach. We can look into that.
Okay.
The railing isn't. That's not really an architectural projection, so to speak. But there might be a mechanism to kind of massage it.
Up under it, but
Yeah.
we can continue. We don't need to get hung up on that right at the moment. Jonathan, do you have any way of pulling up the project on the other corner of Valencia? Michael Luna's
Yep.
project? Now that's a whole different situation. I was just wanted to compare the side elevations on Valencia on both sides. So when you come off the off ramp, you're looking down between the two buildings. Yeah, that's the one. Okay, that's the elevation right there of what's on the opposite corner from yours. The tower and then open decking and that's a restaurant also on the
Is
first
that going to
floor.
be built on the Top Tune site? Is that going to be on the Top Tune site?
So going down Valencia, you've got very little massing other than on the corner itself with that tower. And I'm thinking on your approach, you've got three big massive elements on that side with parapet around them. And maybe it needs to be softened up a little bit.
Well, one of them
Light.
is the stairwell, and there's a very good technique with this colonial architecture for opening those up and having a stepped garden, so it doesn't have to be an enclosed structure per se. And that would be a way to, there could be a roof element. I'm sure you've seen, that
Yeah, so
in many cases.
So-
The massing in general, I think,
yeah, that's what we've got here on the Valencia, and that's the first thing you look by coming off the on-ramp. That's what you see. And now you can kind of envision what's on this side. And maybe, I'm thinking, maybe the roof element you used on the other end, I mean, we're not trying to balance it or anything, that would soften
the corner.
and pull down the massing a little bit on that end. Just a subtlety. Okay. Yeah, let's go all the way around the building.
Is that project approved already?
Yes, it's under construction, I believe. They've pulled their permits, I believe.
Is this on the other side of this
Yeah.
Valencia?
Mhm. On the
So
other
it's
corner.
the gas station lot there that's unused.
And there's another one, there's a dental office,
Right across the street from
yeah,
that
that
one.
faces yours.
Right, right.
That was going to be a Starbucks. Is that still what it's slated for? Or they picked something?
It's now a dental office.
Oh, I'm sorry. This one here.
Oh, this one, I don't know what tenant they've got in mind there.
They were going to have a steakhouse in there for one.
Yeah, I think it'd be tough for a Starbucks since there's no drive-through or anything,
Yeah.
or any ability to have one, but,
So just
Oh,
real.
yeah, Starbucks, Taco Bell, and then something without a drive-through. That's what that was.
On to that point, the very bottom in the footnotes, the first page of the report has links to both those projects. So if you go to the agenda report, the online version, you can click into both of those.
because that almost is creating a view corridor down towards the horizon line that we want to protect a little bit, and it's always talked about by everybody in the meetings. So, okay, let's. I mean, in general, the building layout with the two-floor parking is very similar to what's been done with coming in the back and then coming in the slope side. That's not an issue, I don't believe. I might suggest having a little more, particularly with the tenants you might have here, getting a little more personal storage for things like electric bikes and et cetera. Storage
Yeah.
for anything like that, even surfboards. I don't know who the buyers are, but it will be an active crowd, I would anticipate.
That's a very Southwest type feel. You know, the electric bike with the surfing board
Mhm.
rack on it.
So what do you think, Steve? I think the parking layout
Yeah, I think the
suits the site.
site plan is fine. You know, if we're talking about the site plan, I think the landscape, you know, the way I see it is it's just sort of finding spaces for plants and fitting them in, but there's really not a strong concept where there's a dialogue between the landscape and the building. And I think part of that's because of the symmetry, which, you know, this is not about me, but personally, I'm against symmetrical buildings like that because, you know, what you see with this style of architecture with Spanish colonial is it's a sort of, and this is a big enough building that it could be more like a sort of a village concept. So it isn't just this site plan, floor plans that work, and then you just extrude it on both sides, even though it's the same all the way across. There needs to be some balance to the architecture without just doing the same thing all the way across. And I think, you know, Jonathan, you already pointed that out. All of these examples that we're looking at, there's a hierarchy. So you can see where there's a strong element, and then there's some other elements that are subsidiary to that. We don't see that in this project. And that's a super important part of doing good Spanish colonial architecture. You know, how do you accomplish that? It has to be done with the massing. It has to be done with the openings.
And the
So
shadows.
even though you've got, maybe you want to have the same amount of windows all the way across, you have to treat those in a different way. So maybe on one end, there's a really deep recessed opening, and then another end, it's a pop out. Okay, so you have voids and you have solids. That's where you find the balance. Same thing with the roof. I mean, you don't have to do gable or pitched roofs. You can have parts of it that are flat and other parts that are gabled, that are pitched, and that can create some hierarchy within the building. That's kind of what is lacking. So you've got all the pieces, but a lot of it, I think you use the word ornamental. You know, it shouldn't be ornamental. It should be, you know, this makes sense with this particular feature on the building, but it also strengthens the architecture and makes it more elegant. And that's what you'll see in a lot of these. This is a good example here. And I actually sent a couple of images to Jonathan to show how simple it can be. I mean, this is one where, you know, you have the simple arch, that's a full arch, but you don't have one that's taller and one that's shorter, one that has a certain type of, modulation. They're all very similar, but they're sort of gathered in different ways. Even the downspouts are part of the feature of the architecture. And then if you got a combination, you've got a gable that you're facing in this direction, and then the other one turns, 90 degrees from that. If you go to the next one. And this, you look at this one here, for instance, and say, well, that's too simple. And I don't think it is. I mean, you can get that clean and simple. Of course, this is a great Irving Gill, which I'm sure you guys are familiar with them. And there's elements there that create a hierarchy that this building is lacking. If you go to the next one, I mean, same thing here. There's a rhythm, that's been established across the front of this building. But there's clearly an important tower element. It kind of sets the stage for everything else that's going on. What else did I send you? Yeah, again, these are the features. It's unfortunate we have this glare in here, but you can kind of see where there's a really heavy timber trellis on one end, and then there's this sort of a play of balance where you have recesses. In this case, there's a stairway, which would be tough to do in this project. But it's sort of the modulation of the openings. And I think there's one more. Yeah, and again, these are residential, but you get a feel for the balance of the voids and the solid across the face of the architecture, which is kind of that's kind of the big picture stuff, which I think is going to help in terms of defining the massing. Don't think of it as this has to equal this. This has to balance with this. That's what we're looking for. Is that helpful at all?
Yep.
Okay. And then the ornament, it's really not ornament. It's part of what they established, to kind of define these balconies, whether it's a balcony that's planted on or one that's recessed. And so, for instance, on the back, if you show their back elevation, so the balcony, even with the guardrail, is a very heavy element. And it feels like to me, it feels like it's going to tip over almost. I know it won't, because structurally it'll be designed not to. But if there was something that was holding that up, or if it really read as a true planton, the whole thing was ornamental wrought iron or something like that, that would be more in keeping with the style of architecture.
And while he's on that, looking at the balcony, that thin balcony up on top, take on more of a contemporary look, a Spanish colonial revival look. It's not that handmade Spanish colonial revival appearance.
Yeah, I mean, this is a massive, it appears to be a massive corbel, but it's because you've got some sort of a pop out here, and then you've got a corbel on the edge. There's just so much going on.
And,
And
the
then these
materials they used back then couldn't have spanned that far between corbels. I mean, it's...
I can see there's a little bit of a rhythm here, but if these were just simple arches, it would be a lot more effective. And then here you've got this radius pop out. Here you've got this sort of rectangular one. There's a ton of stuff going on here. And nothing really sort of lines up. Here, is this for vines or what is?
Yeah, that's the intent.
Okay. Which is a good idea, but even the landscape is sort of flat and symmetrical. You could have one area where you have tall palm trees, and then another area where you have a canopy tree, and then some other place where you have, landscape that's lower, that's sort of billowing out, and that has a dialogue with the architecture that can really be helpful in terms of balancing. I don't know who your landscape architect is, but hopefully.
And it's pretty early right now to critique the landscape at this point. But I'm looking at the gable end also, Steve. There's no outlookers holding that. It's just a fascia, correct?
As shown.
There's no outlookers holding that up.
No.
It's just the
No,
typical flat residential kind of overhang.
Yeah,
And,
there's a corbel.
I find it too spindly and too.
The other thing is that dome. I guess you would see that when you get
Off the freeway, because you start up high coming down the ramp, you might be looking down at it when
It's
you're
a
first.
pretty flat pitch. What's the material on that? Is it copper or is it
Copper, yeah.
copper? Okay. Which is, I think, is appropriate, but you might want to consider like a mosaic tile, which is done quite a bit with the Spanish colonial architecture. And I'm wondering if that might be an element that you could shift off of center somewhere, and it would create that hierarchy that we're talking about. So there's just a lot of stuff I think you could do. It's a good plan, and I'm glad there's something getting built there, that's for sure. It's been empty for a while.
Oh, a long time.
Yeah.
So walk us through a lot of for design review site committee, give some perspective here is that when they're looking to do the plans, the designs, what you guys are trying to do is basically give ideas that'll help this shepherd through planning commission.
Absolutely.
Right.
Right, and so these are suggestions that, if you look at like the canary in the coal mine, right? When the canary isn't doing well, you kind of pay attention. So these are all ideas and things that we can integrate.
They aren't mandated. You can.
Yeah, do the best you
Which one?
can, basically, kind of meet those needs. Here's the question I have: is do we come back to design review subcommittee with the changes? Do we go to planning commission with the changes?
No, we come back here. We don't want to be designing from the dais.
Oh, but it happens anyway.
Well,
Does anyone-
luckily the way we've
Really?
been functioning, it doesn't.
Does it good?
We get through it pretty well here.
I would rather to come back to
Um,
have them.
And if you go through your eaves and overhang section of the design guide, they'll show that, the spindly eaves aren't.
Yeah, we're not trying to add cost either. I think if
trying
you
to save you cost. if you can.
simplify, the way we're talking about, it's going to be much less expensive and much more elegant. I mean, this, you guys have a great opportunity here because this is a gateway site. I mean, a lot of people get off the freeway. It's out the community out. So we're excited about it. We want it to be the best possible project. So, and what we found, and it's just, we have a whole new planning commission except for Bart. He's never going away. But what we found is when we come up with a good design here that we recommend, it goes pretty well with planning commission.
The only time we start talking is if there are exceptions to a written.
Right.
So, when I mentioned that balcony and all, it's a recommendation. Either you craft your argument very carefully, or you find another location to make the exception. That's, but both are your decision on, we've got a pretty good makeup. We got one new commissioner that'll, by the time you go through, who is a neophyte at best in planning issues. We've got some that are not prone to doing exceptions. Why do we have rules if we make exceptions all the time? But we are looking at doing the best project we can with you to get this through. So if we can address those, and if you can craft it where you convince us,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, let me ask you a question. Is the low-income unit, is that there so that you can get the exception, or you're doing it for some other?
They have to, or they have to do in lieu fees and all sorts of
So a
stuff.
combination. We also have, and this will be addressed in the planning commission, a 4% fee that is specifically targeted towards a very low income. So that is something that is a component, as well as in this case, it is an option for any development to incorporate affordable housing. As an incentive to do that, they can get an exception. Yeah. And those exceptions increase based off the number of affordable units that you have. So if you have a completely affordable project, they can get a number of exceptions to development standards.
I think part of the one thing that makes this unique is these are apartments, right? These are not going to be cell condos, so they have the ability to manage the apartments in terms of hours and what's allowed on the balcony, and there's an element of control there that you still maintain that you do not have in a lot of these condos and homes in Southwest, where it's wild, wild west. And so if there's concerns, for example, like things on the balcony and what happens and things sightlines, we'll just manage the rules accordingly, right? And do things. For example, you could have a 10 o'clock, hey, no balcony work after 10 o'clock, no loud noises and things. That keeps down the impact on the surrounding residents. That's a unique little component there. I would love to figure out a way, I mean, this is just speaking for me, I live right next to one of the Pasales, right? I'm in Barcelona. That is a very unique avenue through our town that is completely disused. There's zero activity on that. It's not well taken care of. It'd be nice to figure out a way to get more people activated on that stretch, you know.
But we've got to look at this, though, as the current owner. It can be sold, they can try to reconfigure it. So we want to make sure we get the project crafted in a way that
the architecture
can survive best through its life expectancy.
Sure. 100%.
Bart, can I chime in real quick while we're on this rear elevation? Another thing that isn't shown, and you brought this up earlier, is division or separation of these spaces. So like if this, as shown right now at the floor plan, let me jump to that. So
Yeah, there's 2 units going out on that big wide balcony.
Yeah, so here we go. Let's zoom in. There's some lines showing here, but those aren't really clear in the perspective. And so that could be another way to improve the rear is, minimizing some of the changes, but then by adding an element, whatever that element is, that divides each of those units outdoor space, that becomes a part of the interest. And one of the things, again, with Spanish Colonial is making the stucco interesting, and so just some variation, like you said in the front, you don't want to have hard lines always, so thinking through, and you have some of that here, but incorporating potentially some, the stucco as a dividing element between the spaces, that would also help this rear elevation. A part of this image that's tough is we talked about the front, there was like an ABC, and on the rear, you kind of get jumbled. Like, I don't know what's what back here, so I think that having a more clear division between those spaces and then treating each one as like, let's design this as a space, let's design this as a space, let's design this as a space, and then they're connected, would do wonders for that rear elevation.
Yeah, I mean, even if you had, pitched roof on one corner and then a flat section, that would give you that height differential as well. And just carry it down and you could remove 2/3 of the stuff that you got going on there, and it would be a very elegant looking elevation back.
So how do we incorporate some of these ideas and try and get a little closer to where you want? And how do you have that interplay? Do we go back and forth with Jonathan? Do we, how does that?
Okay, basically, they're recording what we're talking about. It's actually, we're just kind of regurgitating what's in the guidelines, in the Lenny architectural guidelines. And I think Steve hit it right on the head. Don't look at all the windows and all first, kind of sculpturally look at it for its balance and proportions. Spanish Colonial Revival is a little heavy. There's no real little thin, spindly pieces. Columns are chunky. The arches are deep recesses. The walls have to look like they've got some depth.
Are you saying? I think what you're asking though, do you have to kind of completely redesign it and render it and everything, come back? We'll look at sketches.
You will.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So you have to do these photo imaging and all. You're kind of ahead of the game on all that.
And I think it helped because you came up with a good plan that works.
Yeah.
But as far as, you can even do, I think, overlay sketches that, hey, what about this? you know, as long as it's sort of all thought out,
So
we're happy to look at that.
So that interplay of like, hey, we're thinking of this, submitted to Jonathan, circulated response, because
And Jonathan will sometimes, if he's looking at it going, you know, is this what you were talking? He'll send it to us.
Okay, all right.
And we'll respond, say, yeah, that's exactly what we were.
Because having to go through the
Anticipated.
formality of that feedback, we could do this for a year, right, on these meetings, and so it'd be nice to get direction and
3 is pretty much the most I think we've seen on anything.
for design review subcommittee. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
And if you want to do an interim, I think, I don't have a problem looking
Yeah,
at something.
if
and,
you are in a
you know, giving
time frame, doing it quick is fine with us. I mean, I will concur with you. I think the plan is there. I think there's some opportunity to open it up to be a little more pedestrian oriented, but that's not a do or die issue. I think proportions is probably the biggest thing, and repetition is okay. Don't get us wrong that using the same elements, but
rhythm is a better word. The rhythm.
yeah.
And
It's a
think-
very subtle. Now you get to be, from being just the architect, you get to be a little artistic
Get to be the artist.
and really become the artist in creating the elevations.
I know exactly where you're coming from. That's fine. That's not a problem. In my past 50 years, I had so many of these critics, which they helped me very much, you know, to get the award for my projects, you know, in different cities. Practicing 45, 43 years in here. And these are all very productive comments.
Are you familiar with the Santa Barbara Courthouse?
Very
building?
much.
I mean, everyone looks at that as kind of the epitome of
Yeah.
Spanish colonial revival. And there's nothing symmetrical about that
Right.
building.
It's
It's got,
beautiful
it's,
building.
you know, it's all
Yeah, it is, yeah.
voids and
Yeah.
solids. You know, perfect balance.
Sure, no problem. I would like to come back, you know, and get your opinion again on all this
And
comments.
we're here to work with you, not
No,
against you.
exactly. No, exactly.
We want to see this to be a success.
Right. Yeah.
Sorry, one last question. We'd love to figure out a way, if you could provide some feedback on how to address this issue, that exception, because it really, we feel like indoor-outdoor space really makes it kind of a unique, cool project. And is there a way, design-wise, to make that work?
I think if it's part of the overall massing of that particular element, that'll go a long way. So it doesn't feel like it's stuck on there, especially when it's protruding.
Just get it nice and
Yeah,
integrated.
integrate it
feel-
into the
Well, back of it. Okay.
into the architecture. I think that would really help.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Just wanted to.
No, this is informal. Go
Yeah.
right ahead.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say, just wanted to make sure that the applicants were aware of all the opportunities they have here for moving forward in this process. Before you come back, definitely communicate with Jonathan about the changes that you're making. Jonathan has been working with the DRC for years. We're very familiar with comments that they make, and so just to confirm that everybody's hearing things the way that they were said. Feel free to work with him on any redesign. Just before we get back to DRC to confirm that all of their comments have been addressed.
Sure.
To the extent that
I
they
just want to bring one note, as an architect, when we start with the project, our client tells us, what they wanted.
We get a
And what is it?
program.
The most important thing is the square footage, maximum square footage that you get. And this project was based on that, how many square feet you get, the bigger apartment units. And as you know, any elements that you were talking about, that would reduce a little bit of the square footage, the thicker walls, the setbacks, the arches, the enclosed, entrances. Those all reduce the square footage. However, that brings the comments that you have already to satisfy those comments. Those are the elements that I have to look from here on. square footage gonna get smaller a little bit, or not necessarily. But what I'm trying to say, if we get maximum square footage that is possible to get, your design is a little bit, your hands are tighter. So in here, as you can see, when we started it, it was suggested to have 8-inch minimum or 10-inch minimum thick walls, so we came up with a 12-inch. In some areas that we have 14 inches. So that reduces some of the square footage, and also the outdoor, so then with this comments, positive comments that I'm getting, we will need to have the square footage, put it on a secondary, to come up with really a design that is, as you said, is a gateway, into that street.
I don't think that's necessarily the case. I mean, the things that we're suggesting, we don't want to reduce the square footage per se. We want to improve the design. So I think there's ways to do that without affecting the square footage.
And every project you
That's the
work on,
challenge.
every project we've worked on, always has that issue.
Yeah, that's why it's not easy to.
I mean,
To do
when
it.
they say the total square footage, what can I get on this lot? There's the zoning ordinance, and then there's the design guidelines, and they don't necessarily both give you the same answer.
Yeah, right. So that's what I'm trying to say. Now, the design that is in here, some of those, they've been incorporated from the comments that we received from the planning department. So this is not the first one. This is the third, comments that we received, and some of those comments, you would see it is incorporated into this design.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but there's a lot of them that I saw that weren't. And it's the first time we've seen it.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, no, that's okay. But I'm
Okay.
saying, so it's been what, year and a half to almost 2 years, that we're working on this
It's
project.
a complicated lot, and
Yeah. So yeah, it is in 4 sites. You have public right of way, and unlike the other one, has only 2 sites. Or 3 sites maybe. So we're gonna get into it, and hopefully next time that you see, it will be in your approval.
Yeah, the other thing I would want to mention is, we're not looking at the signage right now, but, you should give that consideration as you redesign the building. Because, what I'm seeing here where it just says tenant sign, that's not well integrated into the architecture. And that is a super difficult thing to do.
the sign ordinance is very strict.
Well,
Good.
absolutely. The sign is not designed per your ordinance. That was I don't know if you did any sign package
Yeah,
designed,
mentioned.
right?
Yeah, and there's comments.
But if you can design it
to
into
address
the style of
before that
architecture,
goes
that's
in.
wonderful.
Yeah, we're just saying,
Yeah.
keep that in mind
Right.
as you redesign it, because, there's problems just with what I see here, and I know you haven't considered that yet, but, this sign above this high arch, just kind of planted on the wall. You've got a fairly thin element with this wrought iron guardrail, and then you try to fit a sign in that's the same size. There's just some problems that I just want to caution you. That's good to think about
Yeah,
when you're going through it.
Avoid the distraction.
The other reason to consider it earlier is because all new buildings require a sign permit before any discretionary sign permit before any sign gets put on. So we've got people that build one of these buildings and it's done. The building is done and they want to start getting their tenants in, and their tenants want signs. Well, at that point, their tenants are 6 months, 7 months away from actually having a permanent sign, because it requires a planning commission approval for a master sign
That
program.
can go
for the building.
concurrently, right?
Yeah.
With the-
It can.
It
works
can go
best if it
concurrently,
does.
yes, with this
That's what it's
process.
saying.
Right.
Works
Yeah.
best if you do.
And they did submit a sign package. It just, there's some changes that need to be made. That will come back to the
Oh,
sign review.
even better.
Can I ask you a quick question? We
Yeah.
saw coastal commission permits are needed. What coastal commission permits are needed for this?
One of the lots is in the coast.
Yeah, here, let me,
That's in the coastal zone?
it is in the coastal zone bisects the lots, so it's the very edge of the coastal zone. this is not what everyone can
Would we
see.
be able to process that through the local plan?
Not at this time. Not at this time.
But by the time this gets to the point where you would need a coastal development permit, we will not have the local authority for it.
No, not then.
So yeah, we're working on an implementation plan, but that's not certified yet. That's what I understand is next year. But your project would probably be ready to get reviewed by coastal independently before that element's certified.
So,
So it bisects one of the lots.
Both of them.
Both of
Yeah.
them.
Yeah. I'll show you on my laptop.
Yeah,
There's no meeting.
That's a swallow deeply issue.
Yeah, I love Coastal Commission.
But I think since you are maximizing density, and if we do a good enough job, and that they are rental,
And if you have that affordable unit,
get that affordable unit,
It sells well.
it's still a nuisance, but it sounds
Wait,
like it's
yeah.
palatable to them.
Yeah.
That's what they're looking
Many
for.
times that's all it takes. Yeah.
okay. Any final thoughts on?
No, just sculptural. Look at the things that have been done in the past around here. And remember the materials it's supposed to mimic on the size of the elements, and be very sensitive and have a good understanding of looking down Valencia and that first impact looking down there. Because people will ask you that, and I wouldn't be surprised if the public even asks that same question. So it should be addressed or be ready for it.
Okay.
But I'm excited about the project.
Yeah, we're very excited about the project. Glad to see something going on.
Be a nice face up there.
Yeah.
And one good thing, when you're done here, it usually means you've got 3 of the 4 votes you need.
Yeah, and what we have seen is once we, arrive at a good solution here, they're not scrutinizing the other
has
planning
council been
commission.
pulling stuff lately?
I don't think they can agree on anything.
Is that on the-
But you didn't hear that from them. And you wonder how I got here.
off first. I think I was on the first point here, wasn't I? Oh my gosh.
Remember, they're recording it,
Yeah, that's all right. That's all right.
After
Well,
that
that's
many years,
pretty
he
well
could-
done.
I don't think any of them would argue with
He's
that.
on his 12th year, he doesn't care.
I think they've got enough on the plate. I don't know how much they'll be pulling.
Yeah, I don't think, and this, I think, is such a huge benefit to the city to get that. That'll be the most Spanish colonial revival, other than maybe Vista Hermosa. Once a hotel
Yeah.
gets done, that the city has. I mean, this is a big focal point. El Camino is a popular exit.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So we're going to move on to the next item. If you do want to stay around, I'm happy to chat after the meeting about the comment letter. Up to you.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
gentlemen.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
And that one comment, this just seems a little light and spindly and, not just how it's held.
So go light on this.
Well, it's not light, I mean, it almost is looking for some kind of support somehow.
Oh, I see.
You don't really see those big, long cantilevers of a wide width on Spanish Walnut.
I
They'll
see.
either have corbels or
Corbels,
posts or
yeah.
something.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Look forward to seeing you again.
Yes, same here. Thank you again.
Okay, Jonathan, let's pull out an agenda. What are we calling yours? That's ongoing business?
Yes.
Let me to sign?
Un-
Any new business? None.
Jonathan has
Old
no new
business.
It's all
We've
old.
got parklet dining exceptions requests, solar string lights, Jonathan.
Okay, so very brief report. I think the focus will just be some images up here. The guidelines that we had put together discourage string lighting, but require solar lighting. And obviously I did not dive into all of the weeds of every element, but apparently solar string lighting is now very common. And so a couple of people have installed those. I did let these businesses know on the street they may need to remove them, but that I would review with design review and discuss and then send a determination. So I have a few images here. You can see this right here is a panel, so it's not connected to the building. It's just powered by the solar panel there. Here's another one that's using that, again, a panel that is powering the solar string lighting. And then these are all solar lights as well, but this is just an example of one of the ones that does not currently have the string lighting. I did get comments from a couple of the installations. I think I have one of here. Pronto also has solar lanterns that are hanging. And they did say that there's not good visibility in the evenings, so they do not have string lighting, but we're also interested in adding it if the committee was open to that. So that's the topic here, and now over to you.
Well, I know this went and was approved by commission, so I don't think we can just say, yeah, go ahead
String
with it.
lights?
It was discouraged by the commission. They accepted that input from us. But there are lots of ways to light, so
Yeah, I'm totally against it.
Okay.
So just before,
But,
and I'm not commenting on the feedback, I just want to establish the authority with which the design review subcommittee has to review exception requests. Just to make sure that there's no question about that. Jonathan, can you refresh us on exactly what types of exceptions are allowed to be requested and what the design review subcommittee is allowed to approve?
Sure.
yes, very good.
Yeah. So the ordinance did list out a number of specific dimensions, materials. For instance, wood guard railing around the edges of the decks, specific layout, and no solid walls, for instance. So some of those things were specifically referenced within the ordinance. Setbacks off of the parking lines, for instance, were also specifically referenced within the ordinance. Separately, we have a guidelines document that does touch on umbrellas, like the style and size of those elements. And within the ordinance, there's an exception process that's referenced that gives the authority to the community development director to make a decision that follows design review's review of an exception request. And so anything within the guidelines, the ordinance does say the guidelines may be modified or altered at time to time by the city. So the guidelines are similar to our overall design guidelines. This is the goal, but design review has the purview to review those, determine when and if an exception is appropriate, make that recommendation to the community development director for a decision.
Okay, so what about the specific item, the lighting?
Yeah,
Do we
so
have the authority to?
So solar, to bring it back to that example, solar is required. So you wouldn't have the purview to say, we want to allow this person to plug into their direct electrical and provide that. But the string lighting is not something that within the code is specifically prohibited. It's discouraged within the guidelines. And so if you felt like solar string was different than what the intent of that was, and you were open to it, you can make that recommendation to the
Okay,
community.
I'm not. I understand totally why they want it. With the discussions we had, it appeared there were more against it than for it, and I'm also concerned that with all those bulbs out there, you are affecting the visibility of the signage of the other retailers, because your eyes are going to
Well, it's a
close
glare-
down
it's a
and
glare.
dilate, you're not gonna be reading what's behind them. And I think I can justify not supporting them for that reason, that it's a distraction.
Sure. To clarify one piece, Planning Commission and Design Review did support string lighting that was surrounding like the edge
Handrail height,
of the handrail. So those
that would be a different situation, that I could,
okay. So the direction I'm getting is that they should not be floating. You can still reuse them if you'd like to, but they would need to be mounted to the guardrail around the edge. Is that a good?
Yeah, it has to do with seeing the light source, so it creates a glare field. If it's somehow hidden by the cap of the guardrail, then it gives you quality of light that isn't, blinding. When you look right into. And plus, the way they string them is going to create this haphazard look across, the whole street, and it takes away from what we're trying to do here. I think it's.
I mean, if this was a regular commercial district and not a historic district, probably approach it a whole different way, but I think we've got to be sensitive to that.
Okay.
And I hear you've got also Wayne Eagleston's here.
Always. And which is why I'm happy to bring these things to you all.
That's what we're here for.
Great. Well, thank you for that feedback. I think that's everything that I need on
Okay.
that item.
Move on to oral and written communications. We have none, and we have an adjournment.
Oh, yeah, I move that we adjourn to the next DRSC meeting, which is in July
July 13th.
13th.
I second. Vote. And Crandall is, and I also. Now, we aren't having a meeting till like the